or it could be everything is breath or vapor or vanity. And the idea is that Abel is barely there. He acts, but he doesn't talk, and he plays a marginal role. And so Psalm 144 tells us that man is like a breath, Hevel. His days are like a passing shadow. And so Abel's name alludes to the fate that is in store for him, that his life is going to be cut short. Well, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. So the brothers are worshiping, and they're bringing an offering to God. They're in Eden, but they're outside the Garden of Eden. And they're seeking God's favor. Their family having been put out of the garden and is living on its fringes. They're trying to get back in, I guess. Verse 7 refers to a door. And that door is not so much to Cain's door, but to the door. And some think, therefore, that they're really literally at the door to Eden. And this Hebrew word that's translated offering refers to ritual offerings, either from the flock or the grain, that sometimes can mean a tribute that you're presenting to an overlord in trying to win his favor. Well, God regards Abel's offering favorably, but he has none for Cain's. And Cain responds by getting angry and depressed. And the only indication as to why God preferred Abel's offering is that he brought the firstborn and the fat portions. But it doesn't say that Cain offered the first fruits of his crops, as Leviticus was later to prescribe. And so in Hebrews 11, we're told, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous. God commended him by accepting his gifts, and through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. That's his blood that still speaks. So whilst Genesis 4 doesn't give any reason or explanation for God's choice, the New Testament reflects on it and suggests that it was because Abel's sacrifice was more acceptable. But it doesn't say what made it more acceptable. I think the point is that what the reason was in their heart. We can't see it, but God could, and God made a decision. Well, God comes looking for Cain. So he's not even waiting for him to sin. God comes to him before he blows it, like he did with Adam and Eve after they blew it. And as with Adam and Eve, he tries to draw him out with a question. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why is your face fallen? If you do well, Tov, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, Tov, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." So he is now at his own tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And God is trying to help him by telling him that sin is crouching at the door. So his mom and dad are a snake. He's got some kind of monster, and this monster is called sin. So remember in Genesis 1, we talked about the chaos monster. And we talked about sin being a chaos monster, like the serpent. So if Satan is behind the serpent, sin is being depicted here as the monster. And it's been personified. You know, one of the interesting things that Paul does in Romans 7, Paul says sin is the one that was doing it. You're like, what? This is what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact that sin is not just something that we do, but sin is a power. You know, we take sin very lightly. We think we can mess with it. We think we can let it in and turn it off when we want to turn it off. And what we're seeing here is that sin has a power of its own. And just like James 1:15 says, there's a growth cycle with sin. First we're tempted, then we're lured away and enticed, then that gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death. But here's the important thing. We do have a choice. And so God says, you know what? You got this monster at your door, but you must rule over it. Back to the serpent again. We want to say, well, I see it and make me do it. But God says that's bad theology. Because whether you say there's some power at work, and there is, or not, the fact is we can overcome. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you're tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. We are responsible. You sin, you're responsible. No matter what the circumstances, the woman you gave me, the serpent, you are responsible because you have choice. We are free moral agents. And we can resist sin. We can say no. And even though it's crouching at the door trying to get us, God says, you must rule over it. And so we're back to Isaiah 5. What Cain does is God tells him, hey, deal with it. But he decides, I'm going to do my own thing. And he does what is good in his own eyes. And so Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. We don't know what he told him, but I bet it's a lie. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. So he's a liar and a murderer. He deceived him. For some reason, they go out into the field, and whilst they're there, he carries out what he really intends to do. So he chooses now to become a seed of the snake by deceiving and murdering like the snake. And he bears hostility toward his brother, who's the seed of the woman, and strikes him down. And so God comes looking for Cain again. He's still pursuing him and trying to save him from himself. And he's still asking questions to draw him out. Are you seeing God? Then the Lord said to Cain, and notice what he's doing. He's not accusing him. He's giving him a chance to make things right still. Where is Abel, your brother? Like he asked his dad, where are you? And he said, I don't know. Outright lie. And then he gets snarky. Am I my brother's keeper? Now you notice that there's a difference in the attitudes. There's a deterioration going on here. We've got Eve, whom she has got to be deceived into sinning. And we've got Cain, whom God cannot convince not to sin. And when God confronts him about his sin, what does he do? First, he lies directly about it, and then he's unrepentant in his response to God. Sin is a corrupting influence. So whereas we had none order in the world, the sea, the darkness, the desert, that's none order. It is benign. But man has introduced sin, which is disorder. What that is malignant. It is corrupting. It is rot. It is depravity. In other words, it gets worse. You've had this experience. And so his sin is worse than his parents. He not just eats a fruit, he kills his brother as a result of acts in worship, and he doesn't accept his punishment. And the Lord said, like he said to the woman, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground. Now, interestingly, his parents aren't really cursed. But here he is cursed from the ground because things are getting worse. Which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. So God asks Cain the same question he asked Eve. Abel's blood cries to God from the ground, and so God must punish Cain in order to do justice to the innocent. And this idea of crying out to me is the same language when God says, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are crying out to me, I must go down. Or in Exodus where he says, my people are being oppressed in Egypt, they're crying out to me, I must go down. God is a just God. So even though he wants to be merciful, he's got to listen to the cries of the innocent who suffer as a result of evil. And so Cain is cursed from the ground because he polluted the ground with his brother's blood, and the ground rebels against him and will no longer cooperate with him when he works it, and so he has to become a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. The guy still doesn't have a good attitude. He says to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Really? You should be dead. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground. No, the ground has rebelled against you because of your sin. This is the classic picture of somebody who we would say is not broken. And from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And then he has the gall to say, and whoever finds me will kill me. Yeah, well, that's what you did. You killed your brother. But the reason he's even thinking about that is, guess why? Because he just killed somebody. So he knows, wait, killing can go on. So, Adam was afraid of death. Cain is afraid of someone killing him. So we have fear again. But the Lord said to him, this is amazing. Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Notice God doesn't say that I'm going to prevent them from killing you. He just says that if they kill you, I'm going to bring justice for your death. And God is saying, in a sense, that because people know that I'm going to deal with them, that is a measure of protection for you. Well, this is God mercifully protecting him after he sins. So we have the same pattern. Human sin, there's a judgment where God says this is what is coming to you, but God in the midst of it showing grace. And then finally God executes the judgment. And what we see is in Genesis 1 to 11, beginning from here, is this desire to get close to the divine presence from which order flows. That's what Cain and Abel are trying to do. And what we're going to see is that Cain, he's trying to create his own order away from the presence of God when he builds a city in a moment. But the way the biblical story progresses is God creates, and then because of sin, there's uncreation, like the flood. And then God does recreation, like after the flood, but then they blow it, and at Babel we have, again, decreation. And then God has got to bring about creation again. This is on the slide. I won't stop here. You can see this pattern going throughout the book of Genesis from 1 to 12 of creation, uncreation, recreation. It is cyclical. And basically the way it works is God creates a cosmos, man is in the garden with God, that's all good creation, and then there's sin in the garden, Cain and Abel. It keeps getting worse, the sons of God. It gets so bad, God says, I'm going to hit the reset button. There's a flood. He starts with Noah. Noah sins. Babel is like, they're gone up to the clouds now with their rebellion, and God has got to scatter them, and he starts over with Abram as new humanity, and you know how the story goes. It's in and out of creation, because as Julia said, God is constantly resetting, because he's trying to get back to a place where he can dwell with us, and he doesn't stop. So Genesis 1, creation, the flood is decreation, there's a recreation with Noah, there's decreation with Babel, and then there's a recreation with Abraham. All right, so then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord, and he settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So he goes further away from God. So he is first, they're outside the garden, but they're in Eden. And he's gone now east of Eden. He's away from God. And he builds a city. We're going to come back to the city at the end. And then we have a progression of his line. This is the seed of the snake. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad fathered Mehujael. Mehujael fathered Methusael, and Methusael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. Now, Lamech is the seventh from Adam. And 7 is that number of perfection or completion. And his name, Lamech, is king spelled backwards. King is Melech. His name is Lamech. Now, so we have here in the 7th of the line, this is now everything coming to fruition. And we got this guy, first thing he does is he takes two wives. When Genesis 1 says a man is supposed to be united with his wife, he's doing what he sees good in his own eyes. He said, I don't want one wife, I want two. So he's distorting the pattern that God has created. He's doing what he sees fit in his own eyes. And then Cain bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was a forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So Lamech's descendants are seeking to establish order through human-centered means. And this is not all bad. First, we have some urbanization. The first one, he's doing agriculture and animal husbandry involved in the domestication of livestock. And one of them is responsible for music and culture. And one of them is, involved in metallurgy. He's making, instruments of bronze and iron. Now, what we see here is human civilization. But this can go both ways. You can use iron and bronze to make farming implements, or you can make battle axes to bash people's heads in. You understand what I'm saying? You can make music that just really brings joy and is inspiring, and you can make music about things like the song we're going to see that Lamech sings in a short while, which is just, it's just a bad influence. And so what we find is Lamech saying to his wives, and this is kind of like a poem, Anna and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I've killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Now, this is a bad man. This guy, he says, don't mess with me. Let me tell you who he is. If you wound me, whether you're young or you're old, I'm going to respond by killing you. And if God says I'm going to avenge Cain sevenfold, then I will be avenged 77-fold. And Jesus is kind of riffing off this when Peter says, how often should I forgive my brother? And Jesus says 77 times. And I think this is also behind Jesus saying, someone strikes you on the cheek, you turn the other side as well. The kingdom of God is completely different. This is the kingdom of man, This is the city of man. You know what he's going in Jamaica, right? So me have my billy in the car. And the boy deal with me in the traffic. Just a fly the door, and I'm going to deal with him. You've seen this kind of behavior, yes? That is how we feel we have to be in the city. And this is where it gets to. So Lamech he's a violent man. And so again, we have people who are calling evil good and good evil, putting darkness for light, light for darkness, bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter, who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own. So God saw this was where it's going to go. This is why he had to get them out of the garden, because he knows that the path they've started on, once they're going to do what is right in their eyes, it's going to get worse from generation to generation. And so eventually in Genesis 6, we're told, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on the earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people of the earth, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm sure they're going to destroy both them and the earth. It got to the stage where God had to deal with it. Now, this is the nature of what we build. We live in Jamaica. This is a violent country. Some of the things that you read in the news, they're frightening. I was thinking to myself, why do we have burglar bars in Jamaica? You know what burglar bars? Yeah. We're afraid of each other. And we know that because law and order is not strong here, that if people come into our homes, we're going to experience violence. This is what the Bible is talking about. And some of the things that we know happen in our country, God has to deal with it. And so we think, God never give them a chance. God sees where it's going, and so he deals with it. Well, there's a ray of hope. Adam knew his wife, and she bore a son. He called, and she called him Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. You see the pain she's had in childbearing? Not just labor pains, but the pain that children can cause. To Seth also a son was born. and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. So the next son is going in another direction. These are the seed of the woman, and they are turning to God and seeking God's presence instead of doing their own thing. And when we get to the seventh in that line, that's Enoch. That's not in this class. We're told that he walks with God, and he doesn't die because God took him away. So Cain and Abel, what happens is we find Cain and Abel, they're in Eden seeking God's favor. That's access to the divine presence. They're making an offering at the door. Cain seeks his own way, rejects God's way, kills his brother. God curses or exiles him from the ground. God graciously protects him. He goes away from the presence of God, settles east of Eden. He builds a city which is human-centered ordering. And his descendants are originators of human civilization. That's man-made order. And then we get to Lamech, which is the seventh, and that's extreme violence. Well, this city, I don't have time to talk as much as I would like to, but this is the whole theme in the Bible. Because what a city is, the Hebrew word is ir, is really a walled, enclosed dwelling. And we see that as man is trying to protect himself with his grills and his burglar bars, that it's built out of fear, and he's built a city because he knows there are people like him in the world. And so it starts out with these negative connotations. First of the city of Cain, and it gets so bad, you got Lamech, who is boasting about and glorifying violence and murder. And then we have the cities of Nimrod. He forms Nineveh and Babylon, and the Israelites are saying, these are the people that came in and cut our babies out of their mothers' bellies when they were pregnant and dashed the fetuses against the wall. Sorry for how graphic the image is, but this is who they're saying, this is where it's going. And then we have the Tower of Babel, which represents Babylon, which is we're going to build a tower, and we're going to go up, and we're going to make a name great for ourselves. And this is about, really, it is an assault on heaven, and man in his power and in his own self-sufficiency, trying to bring Eden down to himself. And then we have cities like Sodom and Gomorrah. And we have Pharaoh's cities where the Israelites were enslaved. And we've got Babylon, which is the city of man, which is compared in the Bible to Jerusalem, the city of God. But Jerusalem itself becomes so corrupted that Isaiah says, oh, how the faithful city has become a harlot. Because Babylon is characterized as a prostitute, and Jerusalem was supposed to be the bride of Christ, or the bride of God. But eventually, Jerusalem, they look as bad as Babylon. And so the New Testament writers start talking about the Jerusalem below, which is an earthly city, as opposed to the Jerusalem above, the heavenly city. And then we get to the end, God brings a new Jerusalem down. I don't have time to tell you about Philippians 3, where Paul says that our citizenship is in heaven. So our little small groups, Marlene, are supposed to be little enclaves, little colonies of God right here on earth, where the kingdom of heaven is in the midst of people who their end is destruction, their God is their belly, they glory in their shame, and their mind are set on earthly things. But we're waiting for a Savior, the Lord Jesus, who's going to transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him. And that word citizenship is politeuma, which comes from, it means citizenship. It comes from the Greek word polis, which is city, just as citizenship comes from city. I don't have time to tell you about Paul's talking about the Jerusalem that is above. So he's saying, it's not the Jerusalem down here that God is going to take us into. There's a Jerusalem that is above, that's not like the corrupted earthly Jerusalem. Or to talk about Abraham, who we're told was looking forward to a city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Or, we're told that the people of Hebrews 11, not having received the things that were promised, they greeted them from a distance, and they were able to do this because they're seeking a homeland. And they're not thinking of the land from which they came, but they're looking for a better country, a heavenly one. And so God's not ashamed to be called their God, for he's prepared for them a city. And then Hebrews 12 tells us that we are coming to, as Christians, to Mount Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem. And in Matthew 5, Jesus says, that we, his disciples, are a city set on a hill. And we get to Revelation, and what we find is that there's a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And John says, I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride. And in Revelation, there's talk about Babylon, referring to Rome, which is a prostitute. But we have a Jerusalem, not the one here on earth, but the one, God's city, coming down, adorned for a husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He'll dwell with them, they'll be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning or crying or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. And you can read the rest of the passage, which gives us a picture of this heavenly city that is coming down, in which there's no temple, because the temple is the Lord, and it has no need of sun, because the Lord gives it light. And all the nations are going to bring their glory into it. And like Marlon said earlier, nothing unclean will ever enter it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. This is where God is taking us. He's taking us to a place where he's going to give us a city that comes down from heaven. But notice, we started with a garden. But we're going to end, yes, there's an image of a garden, but we're going to also have a city. So if Eden is the undeveloped land, the New Jerusalem represents the fully developed land that God is going to bring us into, where we're going to dwell with him for all eternity.